to Russia now, where President Vladimir Putin has replaced his defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. It's the first shakeup of his national security team since the invasion of Ukraine. Shoigu's replacement is Andrei Belousov, an economist and former deputy prime minister. Shoigu, who oversaw Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, will now run the National Security Council. And for more, I can now welcome here in the studio with me DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert. Konstantin, Shoigu is out, at least of his former post. What's behind all this?
Well, I think the main reason, if you basically change the defense minister in the middle of the war, it means that you are dissatisfied with the way the war is not so much prosecuted, the organized, let's put it like that. The war itself, I mean, the military operations, is the fief of the chief of defense staff, the defense staff, general staff. So he wasn't charged. So in terms of military planning and now the offensive near Kharkiv, that's not Shoigu's business, or at least not directly. What used to be his business is actually organizing the military bureaucracy to support the war effort, organize the interaction between the military-industrial complex, especially the military production for the Russian army, and the army itself, plus personnel policy, which is, of course, controlled mostly by Putin. What I think led to it is Shoigu's adversaries, enemies in the bureaucratic clique that runs Russia, essentially impressing on Putin that, and this is basically the FSB, impressing on Putin that under Shoigu, corruption is completely out of control, and that damages the war effort. A few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, Shoigu's deputy was arrested, and the Russian, what is called Z bloggers, pro-Putin bloggers, were showing this footage of his palaces and numbers of cash that they found in the cellar and whatever.
Not a good look.
Yeah. So I think that this is what Putin wants. He wants a more efficient organization of the war effort, and of course, Shoigu going to the Security Council is a demotion because the Security Council is not what it used to be since the beginning of the war, and Putin does not coordinate that much, I think. That is what the Security Council was for. So it is definitely a demotion for Shoigu.
A demotion for Shoigu, but a promotion of sorts for Belousov, who is an economist with little to no military experience. Why did he get picked?
What's even more interesting is that has no visible traces of ever having been connected to the KGB/FSB. He's a Soviet aristocracy. He was born in Moscow. His father was a very important economist working for the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union. Belousov is known to be very loyal to Putin, and as the Russian social media speculates, he's quite close to one of Putin's daughters in terms of doing joint projects and so on and so forth. Now, he is also known as someone more of a kind of old school, I think it was well highlighted in our piece, someone who believes in the state interference, major role for the state and the economy, even a modern economy. So I think that this means that, Belousov is not connected in any way to what some people in Russia call the general's mafia. You know, all these people went to the same military schools and, you know, that steal from the budget together. So he's supposed to clean up the act there and probably also to work towards more synergy, alas for Ukrainians, between the Russian military-industrial complex, which is still incapable to produce a lot of modern weaponry, and the army. As I said, I don't think Belousov will be telling the general staff where to send troops, whether it's to Kharkiv or to Dnipro.
So quickly, because there's one person in this equation that we haven't yet talked about, the former head of the Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev. What's happening to him now? Well,
Patrushev is 73. He's just 1 year older than Putin, but he's been around for a long time. He's Putin's old friend. But I think that his removal means that he will get some kind of honorific post, still with access to the Kremlin. That's very important. It's more important for them than the money. It's access to the Kremlin. So advisor to the president, something. But I think he'll be gone. His sons are supposed to play very soon important roles. One of his sons is a Minister of Agriculture. Another one sits on the board of Gazprom, having been before the FSB officer. So the Patrushev dynasty, I'm sure, will stay well.
All right, it stays in the family. That was Konstantin Eggert. Thank you so much. Always great speaking to you. Justin Crump is a military veteran and the CEO of the intelligence consultancy Sybilline. Justin, good to see you again. Now, Putin replaces his defense minister just as Russia launches a new offensive. What do you make of that?
I mean, Shoigu is a long-standing Putin loyalist, and Putin places trust amongst all other things. But Shoigu also had a reputation in his time as defense minister of being impressively corrupt. And in fact, one of his associates was recently put under investigation for corruption in military affairs. So there's been a big focus on him. And obviously the conduct of military operations in Ukraine has not been above reproach from the Russian side. So I think it wasn't surprising to see him eventually suffer for that. We'd have been very surprised if he'd been cast away into outer darkness. And he does seem to be in a position now where he remains close to Putin, but there is new leadership in the Russian Ministry of Defense, and particularly its new leadership with a accountancy background, a financial focus. And anyone in the military will tell you that here's a sign that audits are incoming, and almost certainly there's an attempt here to get rid of some of the corruption that's really hindered Russia's war effort.
Yeah. Do you think that's the main reason he brought an economist in?
Absolutely. I think I'd be surprised if the incomer is there for very long, but I think he's there to clean up shop on a number of fronts, effectively on a much more technical front. He doesn't have the military background. He's there, I think, really to almost in a way to be the receivers, if you want to look at it in a business context, the people who've come in to sort out a failed enterprise. I think a little bit he's there for that reason, and I'm sure it will then move on again into new hands. But for now, Shoigu's face saved with this move. He remains in Putin's inner circle, but the MOD itself under new leadership, at least for a while.
What does his appointment mean for the war effort?
I mean, changing your leadership at any point is rarely a sign that things are going terribly well, particularly if it happens often. And the Russian leadership has been a revolving door, particularly on the military side, for many people. Interestingly, the commander of the latest operations in northeast Ukraine, outside Kharkiv, is Colonel General Lapin, who previously commanded in that area. He's been the Army Chief of Staff. After he was sacked from that, he's now been brought back to command military operations. And his experience is not unfamiliar. I think some other names will come back who've commanded in Ukraine in the past as well. And Russia just keeps trying to revitalize its leadership, and I think revitalize its strategy to keep going forward, to keep finding solutions to the many problems it faces. But it is gradually finding those solutions. And I think this resolve to act within the leadership shows that Russia is maintaining its focus on trying to win this war in Ukraine.
So Andrei Belousov is the new Minister of Defense. Let's look at the latest events on the battlefield. Kyiv's troops are locked in intense battles with Russian forces in Ukraine's northeast, especially right now. What are Russia's goals there?
I think in the northeast, Russia had gathered a force overall of around 50,000. We think around up to 30,000 troops might be involved in the latest operation. They're not particularly well equipped. They're not particularly well trained. And there was some uncertainty about if they would ever attack from Belgorod towards Kharkiv. But they have obviously crossed the border in the last few days. They are slowly advancing. Ukrainian resistance wasn't as strong as I think the Ukrainians thought it might be on the first few days. The fighting is increasing now. But it remains unclear what their actual ambition is there. It seems to be most likely they're trying to push the Ukrainians back from being able to attack Belgorod, the city that has often come under artillery fire within Russia from the Ukrainians, create a buffer zone along the border. That's the sort of most likely stated intent. But the real hope of the Russians, I think, is that they draw off the Ukrainians from the Donbass, as they are already somewhat succeeding in doing, force Ukraine to have to protect its borders more, to have to deploy more troops to the border areas, and particularly outside Kharkiv and that sort of area, all of which makes it easier for Russia to maintain its advances in the Donbass. It's very slow and steady on all fronts for Russia, but they are gaining ground, and once they gain it, they're holding on to it at the moment. And that's the way I think that Kremlin likes to see it right now.
Yeah, we've heard many cries for help coming out of Kyiv and very clearly saying we need more support in order to push this back. How well is Ukraine, with the means at its disposal right now, managing to hold the line?
Well, we discussed this a few times, and we talked in this program just last week about the glide bombs, for example, that Russia can currently launch from safety within its own territory from its aircraft that then glide into Ukraine up to sort of 60 kilometers. It's very hard for Ukraine to counter some of these tactics at the moment, given their shortages in air defense, given their shortages in artillery as well. Russian troops shown on the first day of this attack into Kharkiv last Friday, just walking across the border. They would be prime artillery targets if Ukraine had ammunition available. They don't at the moment. But I think the expectation is that Russia's window of opportunity to do things will start to close later in the summer as Ukraine gets more help, as supplies flow again, and as they overcome some of their personnel shortages. And so for Russia, this period of time is all about making gains while they can, in the anticipation it will get harder again when Ukraine gets more. But again, Russia's other hope here is if they take territory, the Ukrainians won't be able to get it back. Every bit of Ukrainian territory lost, and it's around 120 square kilometers so far in the area around Kharkiv, Russia views as they will stay on it. If they take it, they will keep it. And so they don't care if they only gain a few fields a day. They will keep it. That becomes Russian territory, and they'll just keep doing that day after day. That's the current Russian strategy.
I want to bring up something else, because British Foreign Minister David Cameron recently suggested Ukraine was allowed, in fact, to use weapons supplied by Britain against targets inside Russia. Have you seen Ukraine doing this? And could Britain's stance on this lead to the positions of countries like the US, Germany, and France possibly changing?
There's been a lot of reporting around this, and there's some ambiguity about the US position at certain points as well. As to exactly what was allowed, where a red line was or wasn't, but certainly David Cameron's statement is one of the more clear ones. At the moment, there's more than enough targets, or the way the fighting has been recently, actually up until this attack in Kharkiv, there were more than enough targets in the Donbass, in Crimea, and places to keep those assets busy for the Ukrainians. And they've struck at things inside Russia with improvised drones and other things they've been able to make of their own design, which I think shows that they've focused on not using Western missiles and systems inside Russia proper. I think one of the criticisms coming here about the Kharkiv piece is that Western systems weren't being used to disrupt the Russians before they attacked. They were able to assemble across the border. They weren't interdicted. They weren't stopped from doing so. And so it's a big piece of criticism. But I think at the moment it's a little bit ambiguous as to whether or not Ukraine could have used weapons across the border anyway. And it's just refrained from doing so far. So whether we see more of that now happen, whether that remains a red line. And to be frank, I think maybe some people want to keep the Russians guessing about whether or not those systems will be used and can be used inside Russian territory, because certainly at the moment, the Russians think they're quite safe across a large swathe of their country. And that would change, of course, if Western systems were indeed able to be used. So we shall wait and see.
Security analyst Justin Crump, thank you so much.